Welcome to the Industrial IoT Spotlight, your number one spot for insight from industrial IoT thought leaders who are transforming businesses today. With your host, Eric Walenza.
Welcome back to the Industrial IoT Spotlight Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Walenza, CEO of IoT One, and our guest today will be Frank Mong, COO of Helium. Prior to joining Helium in 2017, Frank gained 20 years of experience in cybersecurity as CMO of Hortonworks, SVP of Marketing at Palo Alto Networks, and VP of Security at HP. Helium was founded in 2013 by Sean Fanning, the founder of Napster, and aims to provide affordable and universal connectivity for IoT devices through the use of a decentralized network owned by people and secured through a blockchain. Together, we discuss the connectivity challenges facing IoT device manufacturers today and how Helium's peer-to-peer wireless network could reduce costs and improve coverage in open spaces as an alternative to cellular coverage. We also explored the role of blockchain and crypto tokens in securing the network and providing an incentive model for the individuals who build the network by deploying Helium Hotspots. I hope you found our conversation valuable, and I look forward to your thoughts and comments. So, Frank, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure to be on.
Now, Frank, before we dive into Helium and the technology and the business model, I want to just share a little bit of your background because you have really quite a deep background in cybersecurity, so people know who they're talking to. So you've worked with Hortonworks, with Palo Alto Networks, with HP. Can you just give a quick overview of what your roadmap has been and how you ended up now joining a startup, Helium?
Sure. It's always been in cybersecurity. I've spent and devoted my time in that space. It did start in early days at a startup as well. When I first started my working life, I was at a startup called Ignite Technology. Ignite Technology is a company focused on managed security services or managed firewalls back in, I want to say 1999. And when I was 23 or 24 at the time, it was the innovation of the time. It was when companies and individuals were first connecting to something called the internet and using something called a Netscape browser, if you remember back in those days. And so that was definitely a revolutionary time for us in the beginning, in the birth of what we know today as the internet. And over the course of those years, it's really been focusing and honing in on different aspects of cybersecurity and tech, running product marketing there, and then went to Trend Micro to run marketing, both of which were antivirus companies. And I steered away and went into more general management roles at HP in cybersecurity and at Palo Alto Networks, where I was the senior VP of product marketing for the next-gen firewall business. And then I took a jump and went into more of a CMO type of role at Hortonworks. And really, I think at that point, I realized I did not, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to really challenge myself and get out of my comfort zone. And that's sort of when my search for startups started out again, and really thought through about what it would mean to actually be at a startup again. And I found Helium, or Helium found me, through Coastal Ventures, which is their Series A investment company. And after meeting with Vinod Khosla and his team, and I realized, Helium is definitely a company that I'm interested in. And what sealed the deal for me was my meeting with the co-founder, Amir Halim. We realized that he and I had a lot in common growing up. We both love video games. We both played Quake. We both like to tinker with hardware. And really the mission and the challenge is what sold me. Figure out how to build a ubiquitous network for IoT devices to connect. And that was it. And so here we are 2 years later.
Okay. Yeah, great. And it's really quite the team behind Helium, and quite the ambitious mission as well. So shaping the future by rewarding anyone for creating a global decentralized wireless network for billions of machines. So that's just at least your mission as it is on LinkedIn. Can you just give us the high level? Why is this important? Why is the work that Helium's doing important for the future of the internet?
Yeah, I think the challenge of Internet of Things, IoT, and so for folks that aren't familiar, we're talking little sensors, little devices, potentially autonomous machines that have to do simple work, or maybe it's complex work, but they need to connect, not just inside a factory or inside a smart building, but think outside of the buildings and going outside of traditional where Wi-Fi sits, right? So if you think about extending outside the buildings, the only connectivity option is cellular. It's not easy. Tooling to create something from nothing using cellular is actually quite difficult. And so we saw an opportunity as a company, we saw an opportunity to change that. And part of that is having an existing wireless network that can compete with the connectivity of cellular, not from a speed perspective, but from a coverage perspective for IoT, and just built for IoT, right? And that's one challenge. How do you do that? And then the second piece of that is, how do you make it extremely easy and simple for anyone that has a great idea or has an application that they want to bring to reality? How do you make it super easy and simple for them to build on that platform? And usually when you think about super easy, super simple to build, it involves open sourcing. It involves a community of folks that are like-minded, that have the same interests. Really build a network using a decentralized method. It involves a lot of components beyond just wireless technology. But I think a key component is incentive. How do you incentivize individuals, consumers to create a network that's ubiquitous, that works for everything? And once you're able to do that, how do you get folks to build technology and applications using that network? And so that's the challenge we're in. That is the road we're on right now, is to create that two-sided marketplace of both network operators who are consumers and individuals, and network users who may be a simple hobbyist building IoT devices, or it could be a large enterprise that wants to deploy millions and billions of machines.
And then you're using the Helium tokens in order to create that incentive model. Can you give just a quick overview of what are the different elements? So you have the Helium Hotspot, the connectivity device. You have the Helium tokens that provide the incentive mechanism. What are the other elements, and how do these fit together into the comprehensive solution that enables this marketplace?
Sure. There's probably three main components to think about. One is the Helium Hotspot itself. It's a standard off-the-shelf hardware. We're running on LoRa technology, so it's LoRa hardware, LoRa chips built by Syntec, or any compatible version of that. And to make that work and to make that run in as low cost as possible, we use off-the-shelf componentry complementing that LoRa technology. So we have a processor in there. It's like a dual-core processor. We have, I think it's something like, I want to say 6 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of storage, SSD space on the hotspot itself. And we created a open source protocol running on the LoRa hardware. And the reason we had to do that is because our networks are not centrally owned. So we couldn't use some of the other protocols out there like LoRaWAN, because that requires a centralized server for data and key management. We are decentralized because there is a second component in there, which is the blockchain. The blockchain is a homegrown, invented by Helium from the ground up. In our blockchain, similar to Bitcoin, most of your audience probably know what Bitcoin is, where Bitcoin has proof of work for hashing and rehashing data. Our proof is proof of coverage. And so Helium has created a blockchain that can allow the Helium hotspot to communicate with other hotspots nearby and create a trusted network automatically. And that trusted network involves reliability, health, security of the network to prove that they're providing coverage, that the coverage is healthy, it's reliable, and it's secure. So that's the second component of what we've built. And that for the hotspots to prove that, when they prove it, they mine the cryptocurrency Helium. So that's the work they've done, right? Is to prove that they provided coverage. So as a reward for doing that work of proving it's providing coverage, the hotspots mine the cryptocurrency. And then the third component is really the users using the network. How do you get people to build on top of that network? And that's where Helium's open source SDKs and APIs and all of our developer kits come into play. It's doing everything possible to make it easy, affordable, and simple to onboard new applications, and whether it's software or hardware, onto the Helium network. Folks can take a look at our designs and our specs and code and build their own hotspots if they want. So those are probably the three main components that build up what we've created at Helium.
Frank, when you look at who's purchasing the Helium Hotspots, are we talking about small businesses that want to develop their own networks to serve their devices? Are we talking about enthusiasts who are particularly interested in the technology of wireless connectivity and want to be part of this trend? Or are we talking about well-intentioned individuals like my mother who might not know very much about the technology itself, but want to provide connectivity for her neighborhood?
I call them crypto enthusiasts, people that are into cryptocurrency, that probably have a Coinbase account, that purchase some Bitcoin or some Ethereum. They tend to also be very interested in Helium hotspots purely from a mining perspective, mining cryptocurrency. And they like this technology because it's very consumer friendly. We're probably the most consumer friendly, both IoT wireless gateway hotspot and a very consumer friendly blockchain that kind of takes away all the technicalities of blockchain and cryptocurrency and really makes it a nice user experience. And so those are two early sort of adopters of our technology, the Helium hotspot. So definitely, if your mother knows what blockchain is, or knows what Bitcoin is, she would be potentially interested in this, because the hotspot's also very low power. It's like 5 watts of power. So it's like an LED light bulb, right? It's not going to consume a whole lot of energy that's noticeable. And so from that perspective, it's fairly low cost over time. But it allows anyone that understands how to use a smartphone and apps to get going. And that's attractive for a lot of folks. That's sort of the profile of our initial adoption. When we actually did a survey recently, I think we asked about 280 people who've purchased hotspots. Like, why? Like, why did you buy hotspots? And it was interesting that overwhelming, roughly 60% of the respondents told us that they purchased a hotspot because they want to build a network. They want to have a sense like that they're an entrepreneur and they can own and operate a network. Which I think I'm surprised, but not surprised, because if you think about what we're doing, it's very analogous to Airbnb. We're enabling people to become network operators, and everyday folks, average people. Like Airbnb has enabled average people to become hotel management, where they can rent their room or rent their apartment to anyone. Helium's doing the same with the network. Your home network at home can become something that you can leverage, and we're trying to create the other side where others want to use your network, and we'll reward you for it. So that system, like an Airbnb, is what we've done for what we think we've done for telecommunications. Really changing that model.
Yeah, and of course, for Airbnb, people are not necessarily doing this out of an idealistic, objective, but it's because there's an ROI on an asset that's otherwise being underutilized, and certainly that's the case for many people's internet much of the time, right? We're not utilizing it, but I guess this is a little bit early to point to what the ROI is. But is there any indication of what somebody might expect to return on a hotspot that's in a moderately the medium use case present?
We don't know. And that's not part of how we sell. It's not, we can't talk about potential future gains, and we're not involved with that at all. So it's unknown. And so for someone to purchase a hotspot today, and the ones that have really believe in the idea that you're doing this to build a network, you're doing it to become an independent network operator in a very simple and user-friendly way. And the hope is that someday this becomes big. Someday the network becomes extremely useful, and it's something that's highly valued. And in that world, everyone in that ecosystem wins. So, it's definitely not for everyone. But there are those that believe that, and we're super happy they're with us.
Sure. Yeah. Well, you don't need everybody. I guess if you have a couple hundred per city,
That's right.
you have coverage. Online, it says that so limited quantity available for U.S. Ordering, 77% sold. Are you able to share with us the number that are out in a adoption right now?
Yeah. So if you actually download the app, there is something called a blockchain viewer. So in our app, you can actually see the total number of hotspots that are out there today. And so I think like right now, the exact number of hotspots installed across the United States is 395 hotspots. The predominant cities that are covered are Austin, Texas, San Francisco, Boston, Massachusetts, Chicago, Atlanta, parts of Florida. And then we've got a bunch of onesie, twosies, threesies in, I would say, another handful or another dozen cities. We only launched in Austin, Texas first, and that was August 1. That was our first city that we launched in. San Francisco has a nice network because of our employees and friends and family who are doing a lot of the early alpha testing with us. What we've done since August 1 is we've started to really test our supply chain, and we've shipped hotspots to various customers that ordered early, just so we can make sure that our logistics is sound and iron out the wrinkles and correct the mistakes, which there are a lot of them. It's early days, and so we're learning quite a bit about that. But everything we've done, so far is assembled in the United States. We're building everything in San Jose. We're not offshoring this anywhere else, and so we're proud of that. But at the same time, it's very, very expensive. You're in Shanghai, so it could be a lot cheaper if we built this in Asia somewhere. But we've elected to do it in the United States for security reasons, because our encryption keys and private injections are happening on site in our factory, and we're going to keep it that way for as long as we can. That's what that means. And our next shipment is coming out October 15th. So just in less than 2 weeks, we're shipping thousands of units across the United States. And this indicator that you see online today is for our November shipment. So we're probably going to start doing monthly rollouts where if folks order, we should be able to fulfill within 30 days max, probably less. And so right now, because we're shipping in unit volumes of just thousands, not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, it's very expensive, and it's almost just-in-time manufacturing, which is costly for us. And so we try to batch the orders as best we can. And that's what that bar is indicating. So that bar is indicating a November 15th shipment, which is a few thousand quantity. And then we have another batch for December, which is a few thousand more.
Okay. So if you're putting out a few thousand a month, when do you expect to have sufficient, I guess this is still city by city, but when do you start to have sufficient coverage where you can go to, let's say, a large corporate that maybe they need a solution that can serve them, in a significant portion of the US, and you can go with a viable proposition and say, listen, the network is ready for you. We've got the top 50 cities or 20 cities or whatever, and we have this percent, average 50% average coverage in these cities. Do you already have a kind of a roadmap for when that date might be?
So when we ship in October 15th, we will be in 263 cities across the US. And some cities will have more density than others. But I would say 10 to 15 cities will be very well covered. And these are the major metropolitan cities in the United States, like San Francisco Bay Area, Austin, Texas, New York City, Bronx, Boston, Boulder, Colorado, other parts in Texas, as well as Atlanta, Georgia, and beyond. So those are in Chicago as well. So those are kind of the typical major metro areas in the United States, should be very well covered at that point.
Great. And then if let's say I'm manufacturing smartwatches or bikes, and I want coverage for my device, then I go to you, and what's the conversation? What do I have to install in terms of hardware and software to join the network?
Yeah, so first and foremost, we're open sourcing all of our tech, and the open source SDKs and APIs are coming out. I believe the beta is coming out towards the end of October. That will be a set of tools that developers will need. And then we would have hardware development kits that's scheduled to be released towards the end of the year. And that would include featherwing boards, development kits, reference designs for whether it be like a smart dog collar to a smart watch or some kind of tracking device for bikes and scooters. All of those things will be available. We have a lot of stuff in their GitHub, which we'll release. We have over 200 developers already that's on the waiting list, and some have already started developing with us in our early alpha. And so all the tools that developers need will be there for them very, very soon, within the next couple of weeks.
Okay, great. Do you have any visibility in terms of what the cost of the hardware might be in comparison to other, let's say, the legacy or the protocols that they're using today, or the solutions that they're using today?
Because we're on LoRa hardware, existing LoRa devices that a lot of developers in the world of IoT understand or have played with should just work. What they will need is the LongFi SDKs and LongFi APIs. And so that's zero cost, really. They can take their existing hardware and modify it to be compatible with the Helium network. I think anything beyond that, it's exploring the latest and greatest hardware, which is off the shelf. So nothing should be too pricey. Everything should be fairly competitive in price based on volume. But certainly to play around with and to test, it should be pretty simple. We're going to package up dev kits for folks. I don't have pricing on that, but we're going to try to make it as competitive as possible and as easy as possible to adopt the Helium network and our open source technology.
And then connecting the device. So let's say the manufacturer has adopted the necessary technology to sync to the network. The device is now on the street, and it will then pair automatically with whichever Helium device is closest, or how does this pairing happen?
Yeah, it's really cool. Because we're on a blockchain, every hotspot is running a node, an independent node on the blockchain. And what that means is the blockchain knows how to route the traffic. And so the owner of that sensor does not need to worry about the onboard of the device. They just simply need to ship it out there into the world. As soon as it talks, a Helium hotspot that understands LongFi will hear the sensor and know how to route that traffic back to its owner, fully encrypted. It's using something we call an OUI, Organizational Unique ID. That will be a private key, public key pairing between the device and the cloud database for that particular device owner. And it doesn't matter where you are in the world. Everything is permissionless from a wireless onboarding perspective, and it's ubiquitous. So there's no concept of roaming because you don't need to roam. And that's a huge advantage of what we're trying to build, which is it's a public network. It's decentralized. It's owned by the people. And if your device is talking LongFi and a Helium hotspot hears it, that data will get back to you, regardless of what country you're in, regardless of whose network it is. It doesn't matter. The incentive is built in so that hotspot delivers the data.
Okay, interesting. I guess two topics then that come up. One is security. I know this is your background. And the second is, let's say, government regulation. So I suppose some governments are going to be more receptive to having a new network that's not under the control of state-owned enterprises, for example, and others less so. Maybe we talk first about security. So I imagine that companies always very sensitive about their data, and now the data is moving through devices that are being owned by a lot of individuals. And I'm sure that blockchain plays a role here, but how do you ensure that somebody is not hacking their device to tap into a data stream?
Yeah, so each device that's out in the world has what we call an ECC chip, where the private key is injected. And so the private key is actually sitting in hardware, and only the owner of the device has the public key to decrypt that data. As soon as the data is collected on the sensor and it's transmitted over the air, the hotspot hears an encrypted packet essentially. And the hotspot does not know the contents of the data. It cannot unpack. It doesn't have the keys to unpack that data. What it does is it looks at the OUI, organizational unique ID, looks on the blockchain to see where the destination address is, and it's an encrypted address. And that address then the data is sent to that address. And once the address receives the data, the credit then goes to that hotspot. So the hotspot will get credited for transmitting the data, and that's part of our mining protocol. The other aspect, so that's sort of one aspect of security, is that data from collection to motion, it through a public network is fully encrypted, and it's never unencrypted until it hits the sensor owner's database, and their private key is the only thing that can unlock that data. So there's the security, at least in transit, is fully secured. Once it hits the customer's AWS or Azure or Google Cloud instance, then that's where the processing of data occurs and processing of the keys. The other aspect of security is on the blockchain itself. Because every hotspot's a node on the blockchain is immutable. And so it's a collective peer-to-peer network where if there is an attempt to tamper the blockchain, it takes 51% to overrule consensus. If you have a network of thousands or tens of thousands of nodes, it is a lot of work to try to take over the network. It can be done, but it's very difficult. These hotspots and these nodes require you to be in a unique location, and you have to prove your location. You can't just be a virtual machine on some instance. You can't create hundreds of thousands of virtual machines to try to fake the blockchain. It won't work. So we have we're sensor resistant. We're trying to protect ourselves against Sybil attacks and DDoS and so forth. So all of that is built into our blockchain logic. It's native to what we do. So that hopefully answers the first part of your question. The second part of the question really is, I think, less about government philosophies but more about what empowering their people could do, right? Especially in the world of IoT. If regardless of your government mission, government philosophy, if every person, under your care, in your government, in your country, benefits because they get a chance to own and operate something. In this case, communications for devices. I think the incentive is there where everyone will want to do it and they'll want to continue to do it. Just like Airbnb and other things, it's good for everyone. I don't know why a government would be against it. Especially in the world of telco, it's so expensive to build infrastructure. If you can offload that to the masses, give them a piece of the action. I don't know how it's hurtful to anybody.
Sure. Well, maybe the point here is a little bit more that there's very strong legacy players and it's a highly regulated industry. Has this been an issue for the other players, the Sigfoxes in rollout? Have they been coming up against AT&T in lawsuits? Or
I don't know about lawsuits, but if you think about AT&T and Verizon, they have their own approach. They're supporting things like NB-IoT and LTE-M. Ultimately, we think those are flawed approaches because if a small little sensor has to pay anything close to $3-4 a month on a data plan to provide somebody temperature information, as an example, that's never going to work. That just doesn't scale, right? It should be fractions of a penny. And of course, traditional telcos aren't really interested in that business because they don't have to be. They're providing great service for traditional cell phones and iPhones and Android phones, and every person that has a cell phone plan is a product, right? Every year it gets more expensive. It's a great business. Why leave that business? Why not focus on that? Farm that as long as you can. And if there's a budding IoT, emerging market that's happening, well, let that grow. I mean, I think that's best handled by disruptive technology, disruptive entrepreneurs, perhaps the people. Let them grow it.
Yeah, perfect. I think you're probably right there that this is right now not interesting to them, and by the time it becomes interesting to them, the landscape will look quite different, right? 5G, what is going to be the potential impact? I think there's a lot of hype, and probably some of it is well placed, and perhaps some is misplaced. But how do you see 5G impacting your business in the future?
I see zero impact. And I think your audience in the world of industrial IoT knows that so far. I think 5G is a farce. It's just a lie. There's nothing unique about it. It's, to truly get gigabit speeds or fiber-like speeds on your phone, you need a backhaul to carry that through, right? And so how many homes are there in the world that have fiber backhauls? It's certainly not the majority. There may be a minority of that happening in new buildings and new metro areas, which is great. But for you to get the amount of data you need, right? Imagine streaming, 4K on your phone using 5G for 10,000 people at the same time. That pipe's got to be massive. But then you have to be super close to the gateway. It may not even go a block. You have to be within half a block of that gateway to get that kind of performance. And so what I've heard is, one, that's a lot of hotspots. That's a lot of gateways that telcos will have to deploy. It's insane. It's an insane amount of equipment, which is expensive, right? So again, we're getting back to building infrastructure. If you had to put a 5G gateway on every block to provide 5G service, I don't know how is that possible? Like, how is that even possible? What kind of cost is that going to incur, right? It's just ridiculous. And so then you think, okay, great. Well, maybe it's not every block. Maybe we go every 5 blocks, every 10 blocks. Guess what? That bandwidth goes down to like LTE speeds. Oh, that's what we're on, right? We're on 4G LTE, aren't we? That's what the world's on. So I don't know how this is any different. I think ultimately the idea of 5G, unfortunately, is the doing of like guys like Qualcomm, the phone makers, the chip makers. They have to iterate. They need everything to refresh. The network equipment guys, could be the Ericssons of the world or whoever sells telco equipment. If you don't have a new standard, new chip, there's no swap, right? There's no infrastructure change, and so there's no revenue. So to me, I think the whole thing is just a game.
Well, they have to upgrade, but in any case, you see this more as them upgrading towards a higher bandwidth, towards streaming videos more efficiently, not serving IoT devices.
Sure. I mean, at best.
Yeah, my understanding was that was at least one of the propositions, although I know that the standard is still incomplete. So I think there's a lot of, but at least that was one of the propositions, was that 5G would be also better suited towards low bandwidth devices, small data packages, and so forth. But yeah, I guess we won't know if that is a reality for some number of years.
If 5G has chip technology that uses low power, that can run on a little lithium battery for 3 years, maybe. But I doubt that's the value prop. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that in anything actually, other than 900 megahertz, right?
Okay, great. No, it's funny. I was having a conversation with somebody earlier, let's say, last week, who was just convinced that 5G was like flipping the switch, and then IoT was going to all of a sudden be everywhere. And I'm thinking, generally, when we're talking to people about making IoT use cases work, this is not they have a lot of problems, but this is not necessarily the core one here. Let's talk about one or two specific use cases of maybe some of your early adopters. You'd mentioned ag tech earlier. Maybe that would be a good starting place.
Yeah, certainly. So we have a customer called Agulus. They're located in South Carolina, and they're a company that provides telemetry for greenhouse farming, things like vegetables and fruits year round. And what they've done is help their farmers leverage technology and the Helium network by building out sensors that can measure, soil conditions and air conditions, temperature across all the greenhouses from acres on the land, using a one Helium Hotspot as the collection point for those sensors, and then routing that data back to their analytics platform to help the farmers better manage their crop yield over time. And so that's a great example of leveraging the technology for farming purposes to help improve yield and manage that land use over years. The great thing about that is they don't have to deploy Wi-Fi across their property. They don't have to use, cellular, which would be very expensive. And there are certain areas on their land that doesn't get cell coverage either. So that's problematic as well. So it just relieves them of a lot of the problems. The sensor typically, depending on use, the sensor is very low power. So you can plug a sensor into the soil and kind of forget it for a couple of years and not to worry. Those are all cool things. In addition to that, they've also been testing a lot of our tracking sensors that send GPS coordinates back to the farm owners. So heavy equipment, machinery that's on the farm can be tracked, whether it's in use or not in use. And apparently theft on farm equipment is decently high. There's at least a problem there. And so having an independent sensor that's operated on a battery that can last for a while is very useful for them from a tracking equipment perspective. And that kind of ties into a lot of what we've seen around bike sharing and scooter sharing in cities. I don't know how things are in Shanghai for you, but in the cities across the US, there are tons of scooters. One of the companies we've been working with is Lime, that's servicing 200 plus cities around the world. And they've been testing our technology in San Francisco and Austin for some time now on basically keeping their scooters available on the streets for customers to use. And because they're highly mobile, they're easy to steal, but they can track them down with our Helium.
What were they using for connectivity before? I was curious about that because
they all have some sort of cellular for transactions. The problem with the cellular implementation is that they're mostly all these guys, all these scooter and bike companies, sharing companies, are using the cheapest possible cellular available. So that's likely 2G. And a lot of 2G in the US certainly is getting decommissioned. So coverage is really poor. And it's not great. And so having Helium as a backup, sort of as the aid or the low jack, let's say, for scooters has been really helpful for them.
Yeah. Well, I know in China, some of these bikes were being manufactured for something like $40, capex. So I imagine even if there's a $1 a month subscription on the, I don't know what that would actually look like, but that's already a significant cost for them to bear. So I'm sure they're also happy to find an alternative. How many devices can one Helium hotspot potentially service?
We don't have real world numbers because we have fairly good density across cities, but I imagine it'd be in probably like 300 to 500 bursts. So remember, these are not sustained. They're not sustained connections. So there are bursts of data that are sent, and so depending on application and use, if it's simultaneously, I'm guessing 300 to 500 sensors talking exactly at the same time, exactly the same nanosecond, is supported per hotspot. But if you have a couple hundred hotspots in the city, you can sort of multiply that out. Decent coverage for the number of devices on a moment in time.
And if we had a device like a smartwatch, which was not just sending kind of simple bursts of data, but was maybe streaming audio for a conversation or something, would that be feasible, or does that require too much bandwidth for the device to manage?
I would say likely not a good idea. Only because for us to achieve, 100 square miles of range, the data packet has to be small. So we're talking 24 bytes to 20 kilobytes at the high end. So I would argue voice is probably not a good application. However, text messaging or email, limited email could be fine. And so if communications is the application of need, certainly you can, create some, old form pager system or old form, like the old BlackBerries when you kind of text each other simple things.
Gotcha. Okay. But so really designed for IoT machine to machine data.
That's right.
Anything that we're missing here that's critical for people to understand?
I think probably questions I get the most when talking to potential folks who are interested in using the network is network coverage. And so I think maybe just reiterating how fast we're creating coverage is important. August 1st, We shipped to Austin, Texas, and within, I would say, 4 or 5 days, the entire city of Austin was covered. October 15th, we're shipping to 263 or 64 cities. That means within 4 or 5 days, there will be 264 cities with Helium coverage. And that's days, right? Days. At worst case, a couple of weeks. I mean, that is amazing. So if you think about it, that is bringing a network to market in lightning speeds that's never been seen before. I think that's the power of the Helium incentive and leveraging the people to create this, is that incentive model creates a hyperspeed for deploying infrastructure that's useful for enterprises, industrial IoT potentially. And so that's something to think about. It's a hard idea to understand, because it's hard to believe that there are people out there, thousands of people, willing to pay $500 for a hotspot for the sake of mining crypto. But it's a whole new world out there. Times are changing.
Yeah. Well, I believe it. I mean, I think finding 10,000 people to pay a bit of money for a new technology and ownership of a new business model, I think that's something that is very feasible today. The challenge for you then is going to be to engage in with the device manufacturers, the device operators, and getting them on board. So, what would be, if somebody is interested in exploring how their device can use the network, what's the best way for them to get in touch with Helium or to inform themselves around what the steps would be? Sure.
Yeah. Check out our website, helium.com. There's a number of, I think, great resources on there. Our helium.com/enterprise talks about the use cases that we've already shared some of those. Also, if they're a developer and they want to develop devices to operate on the Helium network, check out helium.com/developers. There are great resources. Certainly, if there are folks on the listening to your show that are interested in buying a hotspot, go to the helium.com/store page to take a look. And if anyone's interested, just send me an email, frank@helium.com or sales@helium.com. And we're happy to talk more about how they can onboard devices to the network, or if you want a discount on the hotspot, contact me. I'm happy to share a promo code for them to use. Okay, awesome. Well, Frank, really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for taking the time to brief us on what you're building here. I think this is incredible. I mean, we really do need new solutions to make connectivity more affordable and simpler. So I wish you all the success and really appreciate your time today. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Industrial IoT Spotlight. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at IoT1HQ and to check out our database of case studies on IoT1.com. If you have unique insight or a project deployment story to share, we'd love to feature you on a future edition. Write us at eric.walenza@iot1.com.